There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. As always, sitting across from me is Nephi Cole, and if you can believe this, wait for it, big pregnant pause.
Would you stop?
Mike McGrady's here. I wanted to really build up the moment. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You have aged a lot since I've seen you last. You are significantly uglier now.
Yeah.
But your radio voice is still good.
It hasn't been a year or anything. It's just, a couple weeks.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a while.
I see you at basketball and stuff, too.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen you with a headset on in a while.
That's right. Right. It has been a while.
Yeah. Really quick, before we get started, I got to let everybody know that's listening. You're going to hear some weird noises in the background. You probably usually hear some weird noises in the background. We're recording at Nephi's house. Nephi has a young puppy who is just tall enough that when I walked in the door, he greeted me with the double paws to the giggleberries. Made me keel over on the floor.
Good job, Murph.
And he's got a squeaky toy to keep him occupied while we record. So you might hear a little squeaking in the background.
I wish we had a video of that.
Oh, it hurt so much. It was one of those I was like you get a little nauseous,
Yeah.
Just a direct hit.
Oh.
But good dog. Good dog.
Sure.
So we are today, first of all, I'm excited that we're all here. And today we're going to take on a topic that actually is another one that was brought to us by a listener, which is exciting. So I just want to remind everybody, if you have ideas, if you have things you want to hear about, let us know. Send us an email at yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com or shoot us a line through our social channels at Facebook or Instagram or Twitter at the handle @itsyourmountain. And we take those suggestions seriously. Last week was a direct result of listener feedback and idea. That's a really good squeak toy. This week is also a direct result of listener feedback. And so what we're talking about today are green decoys.
Yeah.
And not the kind I thought they were when I first heard the term. I really thought it was like the next level up of Cabela's decoys. Because decoys are some of the most expensive hunting things you can buy. Right. Yeah. And I just assumed it got to the point where we're just going to call them green decoys because it's going to cost you a lot of green to get them.
So you were thinking like Johnny Walker Blue, Johnny Walker Red.
You got it.
Johnny Walker Green.
Johnny Walker Green. That's kind of what I thought we were working with decoys. But that's not the case. So, Nephi, why don't you kick it off, if you don't mind? When you hear the term green decoy,
so the implication when somebody says
to?
Green Decoy is that you've got some kind of a group that is a sportsman's group. Well, actually, the implication is that it's some type of environmentalist group masquerading as a sportsman's group, right? And that's what you have. Now, the problem with that is, first of all, what is an environmentalist group? What is a conservation group? And second of all, what's the implication with sportsmen that somehow those things are mutually exclusive, right? Mm-hmm. So let's take an example. If we go and I'm really sorry about the dog.
It's going to be really distracting. People are going to.
I could take the stuff away from him.
There's got to be something we can do.
Love him. We can love him for what he is.
Murphy, come here. There. Give. Hey. There you go.
Try throwing that. Yeah, see how that works.
I'm going to throw it. Mm-hmm. All right.
This will be entertaining.
Throws the ball.
I mean,
and
when he squeaks that
Murphy
ball,
gets
it sounds like the audio quality on the On Gravel podcast.
It does, man. And that podcast is an absolute turd.
I mean, they're just dropping bombs every
I listened to one of their podcasts the other day.
Why?
And it
you are the listener, huh?
The best point I ever heard them talk about anything was when they mentioned us. That's
You're
the best
absolutely
thing
right.
I heard on that whole episode.
If I knew who did that podcast, I'd send them a note thanking them.
Yeah, so we're not endorsing, but just know that if you want sound quality that is squeaky and glitchy and all kinds of stuff, check them out.
Hey,
Anyway, that's what you're going to get today. It sounds like Murphy's just going to town on this ball. All right. So we're going to go back to talking about Green Decoys. Sorry for that little bit of a tangent about some subpar podcasting.
So yeah, when you talk about Green Decoys, I mean the challenge is this, and I see it, and our listeners asked us about it, and I guess the question is for them: is this true? Is this a real thing? This Green Decoy?
Yeah.
Well,
so you've defined Green Decoy as being something where an environmental organization is masquerading as a hunting organization in order to put forth environmental objectives through using the credibility of a hunting community.
And then the implication being that somehow they've gotten hunters to either buy into a fake, to jump in this Trojan horse and start riding it, or B, hunters are unaware that they are part of being this Trojan horse effort to leverage the hunting community. And there's some significant challenges with that assumption. And the biggest one, I think, is this idea that these things are mutually exclusive. And we can go back into the history of that, but I guess the question is, Dave, are you an environmentalist?
I've always labeled myself as environmentalist.
Well, what does that mean?
Right? I care about my land, my water, my wildlife. I want to have an opportunity to hunt and fish, to backpack, to enjoy the great outdoors. I do drive a truck.
Does it use gasoline?
It does use gasoline.
I mean, I
use a computer every day.
What about you, Dave? You, Mike?
Right?
I mean, what truck do you drive? You obviously
I
the greatest
drive a
truck in
Tundra.
America.
The
Yes.
greatest truck. Yes, I drive a Tundra also.
So do
Two
I.
of you drive I drive a Ford,
The
a
most
real American truck.
The most American-made truck.
Wait.
We don't need to get into
David,
this.
do you drive a Ford?
Is that your truck, or is it really your?
Every dent in that Ford was caused by me.
Yeah, I
Even
agree
if
with
it's your
that.
wife's truck.
Oh, your
truck.
wife would agree with that. Yeah.
She absolutely would.
So, and now the term environmentalist, right? Unfortunately, the term environmentalist has been.
It's been hijacked.
But by who?
By an extreme faction, right? That if you're not, I mean, it's basically by an extreme faction on both sides. So you have an extreme faction that considers themselves environmentalists, and they put they're the types you're going to find out there chained to trees, and you're going to find using litigation as a tool to complete a legislative objective.
Now I want to come back to chained to trees in a minute.
But yeah. But then you have the other side of it too, and you have the side that the drill baby drill side that also wants to label environmentalists and use that term
Everyone
as a
that's
weapon.
an environmentalist
right?
wants us to have to live in a concrete cave, and that type of thing. So like clearly, everybody wants to push them to the extremes.
Right.
Now, because of that, a term conservationist has become quite popular in the last 20 years.
Uh-huh.
So conservationist meaning not somebody who is an absolutist about not touching, using. So, and that's what people have started to call an environmentalist, right? People have started to say, hey, an environmentalist
Well, the
is somebody.
terms have morphed, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So that term is now being hijacked and
Right.
associated, and
So
there's
when
this
you
push
typically
to push
say it-
conservationists into the same umbrella.
And so as you
or the
say,
same
I'm an
umbrella.
environmentalist, quote, Dave Williams. You're saying in the traditional sense, right? I'm hesitant, like I wouldn't say that, because in the modern sense, we say I'm an environmentalist. The implication is I drive a Prius, or I don't even think I should drive that. I drive my mountain bike.
I've thought we need to take that term back.
Well, that's great.
The reason I will refer to myself as an environmentalist is I get so furious with the idea that term is been
Belongs
perverted
that.
in such a way that we're not allowed to call ourselves that, so I'm a multiple use guy. I recognize that I drive a truck. I recognize that I use a cell phone. I recognize that I turn on lights every day, that I want to heat my home and keep my kids warm and feed them with food that I buy at a grocery store. Yet at the same time, I want to do that in a responsible way to make sure that there's clean water, so we have fish in it to catch and water to drink, and that we have, that we protect open places and landscapes to allow free movement of wildlife, so that I can take my kids out to see them, so I can hunt, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's, in my mind, what I am.
So you're a conservationist.
You
Just
can call
kidding.
me a conservationist.
But
You can call me environmentalist.
But that's the issue
But
that
conservation.
I'm saying.
But my point
just
is,
talking about the label.
conservationist is a term that's being taken away from us now too. And so, what are we going to come up with next? Are we just going to let people keep taking that term away, and we're going to reinvent new terms and have those taken away?
So here's the issue. So let's talk about that issue, conservationist. And so I consider myself to be a conservationist. At the same time, I worked on developing an energy strategy for a state that says we should utilize fossil fuels responsibly, but we should also have mitigation, reclamation, and all those things in order to preserve, for the long run, these landscapes that are so important to us. And so I think that most people in America are going to identify as being part of that middle ground. They're going to be people who are going to, they're not going to find, they're not going to say that, like, they don't want the earth to look like a moonscape, right? Mm-hmm. They also want to be able to drive to the grocery store and, buy milk in a plastic bottle. And so that's where most of us are. Now, the challenge then, I think, from this assumption, when you say Green Decoy, is that you're trying to make the case that those individuals who are part of, this hunting group, who are conservationists, who are conservation-minded, that somehow that's incompatible with that somehow the hunting community and the conservation community are incompatible.
Well, can I tell you how we get to this point?
Go ahead.
So we have this term Green Decoy, and I think it's worth talking about where did that term come from? How did that originate?
Yeah, somebody had to come up with it.
Somebody had to come up with it, right? Mm-hmm. You can go out there and there's a website called greendecoys.com. And greendecoys.com lays out, they're talking about Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, which as a Green Decoy group, whom, by the way, we had somebody from them on this podcast a few weeks ago talking about the work they're doing on access.
By the way, before you get too far, TRCP also gave the governor of Wyoming, Matt Mead, Republican governor, who we all worked for, an award, a lifetime conservation award. So this idea that he's a pretty Republican guy.
Right.
And we all worked on his staff working on energy and environmental issues.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Right. So TRCP, and they have member organizations, sporting organizations that include some of the ones that I'm air quoting, that you'd view as more conservative sportsmen's groups, right? But they're attacking TRCP, Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. They're the moose. What is it called? The moose.
The bull moose.
Bull moose. Yeah. So they're labeling these groups as Green Decoys, and talking about the funding sources, going through their funding sources, saying, where is their funding coming from, and identifying.
Is that how they gauge it? Where these groups get the money?
So
the assumption is that because they get money from traditionally liberal sources,
from organizations that they'd be viewed as, so they'll pick. Giving example, so they'll pick one group and they'll say, okay, they received funding from this foundation. They'll say this foundation, in other work that it does, supports unions and supports some policies that are viewed as anti-conservative policies.
Yes.
They might not be anywhere in the environmental realm at all, actually. It's more anti-conservative. And so that's the messaging, the general
anti-development, anti-energy, green radical.
The theory being that because an organization that is not conservative donated money to another organization who took the money, they are then going to
share all their beliefs.
Right. Yeah, have the same beliefs or carry out the objectives of the person who's donating.
Correct. Okay. All right. So this is the website, and that's the logic behind it.
Okay.
But you want to find out where did this website come from? There's a motive behind everything, right? What's the motive behind this website? So you find out that this website was a project of a group called the Environmental Policy Alliance.
Okay.
Which does a lot of lobbying work against. So the lobbying work is against
the EPA.
Against they do lobbying work against the EPA.
Okay.
Against the they are called the EPA as well, right? But they do they specifically lobby against certain things related to EPA enforcement.
Okay.
They lobby against renewable energy of all kinds.
Okay.
And a host of other environmental related things. And then you look into them a little bit and you say, okay, the Environmental Policy Alliance is actually a project of another organization called the Center for Organizational Research and Education. So you look at this. So the
core. Okay.
So we're playing the same game now with the guys that did the website
No.
that they did with the groups. We're gonna.
No.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing is I'm just tracing it back because you
Yes.
got to see how this starts, right?
So you're describing an organization that's accusing other people of doing what they may be doing themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
So then you look at this organization, this Center for Organizational Research and Education, CORE, as you called it, right?
Yeah, right.
And who's behind that? Who's created this organization? And this organization was founded by a man named Richard Berman. Richard Berman is a very well-known lobbyist and attorney that lobbies, has a history of lobbying for the fast food industry, large meat in the meat industry, alcohol and tobacco industries, as well as
Sounds American to me.
as well as big oil. He actually has a nickname that has been floating around for 15 years called Dr. Evil.
Dr. Evil?
Because of some of the methodologies he uses in some of his work. And I'm just pointing this out so you can see,
I don't know
where
that he
the term,
identifies as Dr. Evil, though. So I don't know
actually,
that's fair.
you
for
know,
Actually, he, from what I understand, he wears that term as a badge of honor.
Yeah,
But here's some. I just wanted to read really quickly a few quotes of his when he's talking about the way he operates.
Do we have to?
I think so. I think
right.
it because
You can have two.
all
Then
right.
I'm going to slam the gavel.
No, that's fine.
I don't want you to just go berserk.
I'm just trying to lay out that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Right?
And if anybody can identify the game where you would go berserk and be a good thing, you're my generation. Go ahead.
All right. So some of the things that he has said, and this is talking about how he structures up for lobbying. We run all of this stuff, the work that they do, through nonprofit organizations that are insulated from having to disclose donors. There is total anonymity. People don't know who supports us. He then talks about how you can either win ugly or you can lose pretty, and he likes to win. And so, these types of
this all just folds into the Citizen United case and sort of the campaign contribution issues also.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, I think it's very interesting to bring that up.
All right.
But let me tell you the reason why I bring it up, and then I'll kick it back to you guys. But the reason I bring it up is the idea behind creating this Green Decoy from this individual's perspective. And this is to tee up kind of a question or more dialogue, right? But the idea behind this, it really wasn't to. It was to sow fear or not fear, but maybe controversy within the broader sportsman's community. Mm-hmm. It was intended to
discredit the voice,
create to fracture the sportsman's community by saying there's a large segment of the community that gets this funding from various places, and they're not real hunters like you are. You're a real hunter, you're a real angler. You don't
subscribe to these ideas,
right? And so it was a way of creating discord amongst the community, and it's a term that the hunting community didn't create. This was a very brilliant marketing PR strategy to create this term of Green Decoy and then launch this offensive and have hunters actually take on that term and use it against each other.
I might be okay with this tactic had the person come up with a solution as opposed to just division, right? Like, okay, I think these groups are not serving your interests, and so I'm going to create my own, and here it is, we're all going to coalesce around getting these objectives for the benefit of hunters. A proactive approach, doing good things for hunters as opposed to just divide, conquer.
Here's a problem I have with it. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. The greater problem I have with it is by even entertaining it, what you're actually doing is you're giving into that concept. You're endorsing it by saying, well, if Green Decoys, and I guess and by that what I mean is this: how many members are there backcountry hunters and anglers?
Last I heard, it was approaching 40,000. It might be more than that now.
I happen to know, having spent time around many of them, that they are this idea that that it is an organization full of radical environmentalists is just not the case. It is not true. And the problem is if we label groups like this as that, you actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. You make them that. Because if guys who are, if you and I and everyone else who, we just love to go, we just love to go hunt. And that describes the guys who are members of backcountry hunters and anglers. Now, they may happen to hunt differently than other people. They might value a backpack and solitude versus, their friends and horses or a truck camp or a tent camp, whatever.
Just as much hunters as everybody else that hunts, though.
But they typically don't look down their noses at other hunters.
No.
Now, the problem is if you start acting like they believe that, you know what you do?
Legitimize it.
You legitimize them. The only people that belong to that organization are exactly what you feared. And then the people who are going to support that organization, guess what? It's exactly the people that you feared.
I think
you've given up on them, and you give away that entire segment that you should be bringing into the fold and under the tent by labeling them, ostracizing them. You create the only place they find safety are with those.
I think it's more sinister than that, because you're talking about on the individual member level and the interactions of the normal people. I think that's true. I'm not discounting that fact, but I think it actually has a bigger problem for me, because knowing the system and how laws are passed and how things work, when a citizen goes in to describe their concerns to a representative or someone who is in a position to make a change of law or policy, they're interacting with others. And those people who they're interacting with within the sphere of either whether it's a member of Congress or their staff, or a governor's office or the staff or something, they're going to look at the organization you walk in on. And if someone in their party goes, don't trust that person because they belong to X organization, you're having a problem getting your legitimate concerns pushed forward to make change. So while it can have a problem at the individual level, it can have a broader concern and a more sinister blowback at the policy level.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to throw this out there because I think it's valid. So for people who think like, well, there's validity to the Green Decoy idea. So what you talked about, so you have an individual who, let's say that we've got somebody who, an organization, let's make up a name, the Biking Hunters of America. So the Bike Hunters of America, it may be that they have somebody who runs that organization that isn't no longer welcome at the BLM. He's that guy that you identified that people are like, he's toxic. He can't come in. You should not judge an entire organization by its leadership currently or its leadership previously. And the reason I say that is because leadership changes. Those people come and go. And when those people come into leadership, sometimes they do bring baggage with them. And I think it's fair to point that out. And I have all the respect in the world for a variety of organizations and individuals. But you have to be very careful, because sometimes those individuals, not only do they carry baggage, you got to be careful that your leadership doesn't take your organization in a direction that the members would not be comfortable with. So if you hire an individual to run your organization, and that individual tends to come from a very aggressive stance wherever they're at, and they start to carry the entire organization that direction without the will of the membership being okay with that, you as a member need to raise your hand and say, look, that does not represent me. That does not represent the majority of our organization. We're getting run away with. And I think that's with this Green Decoy thing. I think that's the implication. The implication from people is not that the 100,000 members of Group X, of Organization X, are bad. The implication is that the leadership of that organization is somehow taking advantage of that membership to take them in a place that they're no longer okay with.
Let me ask you a question. So I wanted to highlight a couple of the points that some of these proponents, these folks that are aggressively pushing this idea that of Green Decoy groups and that their existence and what they are. and I'm going to ask you the question.
Okay.
And let's just pick one. Let's do two. Let's do TRCP and backcountry hunters and anglers because we've been talking about both of them, right?
I thought we were talking about bike hunters.
Well, we were, but now we're talking about
different
these.
organization. That's mine.
Now we're talking about these two.
I run that one.
Oh, okay.
So the criticism of these groups is that they are funded by foundations and unions, and that they're radical anti-industry environmentalists, that they're anti-gun and anti-development. Let me ask you this. So I'm going to pick a couple of these things. In your experience with all the people you visit with backcountry hunters and anglers and TRCP, would you call them anti-gun?
Interestingly enough, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is working on making sure that this is more easily publicly accessible. But their statement, actually, this is a policy of the organization. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers proudly supports the right to keep and bear arms as protected by the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Yeah, he asked you about TRCP. Listen to the question.
Well, I don't know TRCP.
Oh, okay. Well, I can answer it, though. I can answer it from my perspective because I have interacted with folks from TRCP and BHA. And I would say every time I interacted with them, they're always pro-gun, pro-hunting, and they're pro whatever allows them to have guns
to do both.
and hunting. Yeah,
exactly. So that's been my experience too.
Talk to Hal Herring from BHA about that issue and ask him what he thinks. And again, I think, and maybe, do you want me to wait before I go on?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a couple more and then go on. Let me use this idea of anti-industry environmentalism. So that's a pretty vague term, right? What does anti-industry actually mean? I think there's a spectrum of what that actually could mean. Mm-hmm. But I'd ask the same question. Have you seen either of these organizations aggressively saying things like, and this is the extreme I'll put out there for an anti-industry, because both of these organizations do a lot of advocacy on public lands in the West. Have either of you seen either of those organizations say we should stop leasing and developing on all public lands in the West? That's what I view as an anti-industry position, and I know some groups that take that position.
No, I've not heard them say that. I've heard them say, let's be smart where development occurs, or there are some spaces that are worth protecting and preserving, but recognizing, hey, we still need oil, we still need gas, we still need those other things. But you know what? Frankly, I've heard from industry that have come in and said, we like hunting, we like the environment.
That was going to be my next thing.
Yeah.
In the West, where do you think a lot of the union members work?
Oil and gas. Yeah.
Well,
and what do you think they like to do in their recreational
they
time?
hunt like crazy.
Fish, camp.
That was going to be so. That was going to be my lead into the next question I was going to ask.
Well,
right?
So
if you took
some of these narratives,
a true anti-industry position,
mm-hmm.
and we're aggressively out there, you know what would hurt for backcountry hunters and anglers? Your membership.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be tough to bring people in and have the power of that voice.
For sure.
You have to recognize, though, that the narrative that is being pushed includes thoughts of a narrative that occurs in heavily industrialized areas, big cities and things like that are then being used in areas that are rural, out here in the West. I mean, it's just a different mindset here about what industry means versus New York City or Cleveland or something like that, right? So if you have the environmentalist movement to clean up Love Canal and what all that spun out to be, that's just a different term, environmentalist, when you talk about out here in the West.
Now, to be fair to those to be fair to people that have those concerns that you've just expressed, it would not be accurate or honest of us to say that board members for these organizations, that representatives of these organizations have not expressed, in some cases, very anti-industry positions. And maybe not across the board, but it certainly in certain aspects at certain times. And so two things to say about that. One, if there's an executive director of an organization that's saying those things but doesn't have the backing of the entire board and the membership, they need to be called out on it. That's number one. And number two, don't make the mistake of thinking that you don't have diverse boards in these organizations and that you don't have diverse local chapters. And that creates several problems. So with the diverse boards, remember this. You are going to have people on the board of the biking hunters of, my organization.
Right.
You're going to have people out there that are pretty left of center. But you also have people on that same board who are fairly right of center.
And that actually isn't a bad thing.
No.
Right.
That diversity of thought is like, to be frank, pragmatism is what we want. And we have to have diversity of thinking in order to find a common ground that, honestly, that's what our country was. That's the American ideal. The way we do business in this country, our culture is that idea.
And that's what we should be thinking about from the sportsman's community as well, right? You shouldn't think hunter and angler and automatically think super conservative.
Yeah.
Right? I know a lot of hunters and anglers that are very, very conservative. I know a lot that are very, very liberal. And actually, as a community, having that big tent and having both the spectrum under that tent, all under the guise of protecting the ability to hunt and fish and protecting the resource so that we can continue to do that, that's not a bad thing, right? In fact, that's a good thing. It gets us to a place where when we, as a community, want to pick up the phone and to Mike's comments before about having a meeting with staff in a congressional office, mm-hmm. we can pick up the phone and have a meeting with staff on both sides of the aisle and be respected because as a community we're representing multiple interests.
That's right. Now, a caution: if you, as an organization, if you find that the doors to one side of the aisle are constantly closed to you because you do echo only one side of the rhetoric, and you aren't on your board and in your membership encouraging that full voice that is reality, I think you as an organization need to step back and take a look at what you've done.
Well, certainly, and if you're finding those doors not open, it doesn't help having an external sort of
somebody else poking
at you, trying to close more doors on you.
And some of that criticism is deserved. And so, for example, I will say, if you're a new organization, and BHA is a new organization, and so if I'm picking on them, I'm sorry. I'm a member. But here's the issue: if you have a new organization,
and are you super liberal, Nephi?
Unfortunately, the problem is if you
Would
say
you consider yourself a Green Decoy?
Well, I'm wearing green pants right now, so. Yeah. But the reality, here's why I say this.
And you're a shooter that poses as a hunter, so you're kind of a Green Decoy, but in another way.
But the problem with this is that when your organization is fledgling and it doesn't have that policy stuff clearly developed, there is a tendency for some people to take advantage of that inappropriately. And so at the local level, you'll see this quite often, especially with a new organization and young people who are very excited about something. Let's say they get on a board someplace. They find an initiative. They find a cause that they feel strongly in. They go testify in front of a group and they say, I am, Doug Dougson, and I support, and I am the president of this local chapter, and we hate this idea here. This has happened in the state of Wyoming, where groups have come forward and they've said, we support or don't support certain legislation. Well, you know what? The rest of the group, the entire state, like everybody that belonged to that group in the state, didn't feel the way that guy did. Nobody got a chance to weigh in. Nobody was asked. Nobody voted on anything. Nobody pushed. There was no clear policy for it. That guy just decided he was going to wave a flag, and because he felt passionately about it, he misrepresented the rest of the people that belonged to that organization. And what it does is it permanently damages that organization's credibility at the legislative level. Because, and this doesn't just happen at the state level. It has happened at the national level, where somebody flying the flag for what they believe personally so strong, it ends up reflecting poorly on the entire membership, because the assumption is that the entire membership goes along with that. And another problem with being a young organization, and Mike, you kind of touched on this, is sometimes not only are those policy statements not enshrined yet, if you have a young organization, you may not understand what you're wading into in terms of the policy. I'm going to use Waters of the U.S. as an example. Waters of the U.S., and I know you don't want me to talk about it, but how many people?
It's better than soils.
Yes. How many people?
just by, not this much.
There's lots of rhetoric floating around right now because the new Waters of the U.S. rule was just re-released.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the people who are going to weigh in and say, oh my goodness, this is a rollback and all these types of things, never read the 2015 rule, don't understand how it was flawed, don't understand the Swank and Rapinoe's decisions from the Supreme Court and how the agencies got sent back to the drawing board. But yet, because they're passionate, they may be out there saying stuff that they don't understand what they're saying or the implications of what they're saying, and it can permanently damage an organization's credibility, not understanding, that background of where they're coming from. So I do think it's a cautionary tale. If you're in these groups, it's like, hey guys, be informed and don't take positions on things that you don't fully understand.
Yeah. Well, of course, this Green Decoy thing that we're talking about is designed to further fracture and further draw people to the sidelines of extreme views, not based upon logic or information, but based upon this is, because one president supported X, it's good. Because another did it opposite, it's bad, right? Rather than looking at
You're right.
whether something should have gone back to the drawing board or not.
I think where they really get dangerous, and this is a reality of these types of organizations, the question is, do you represent the cause or are you representing a political faction? And that's the real thing that people are scared of when they say Green Decoy. They're not really scared of, we talked about chaining people to trees. We're not really worried about, in most cases, for hunters, right? The people who are supposed to freak out about Green Decoy, do you really care that somebody is really passionate about the environment? I don't know why you would.
No, why wouldn't you?
The implication is that somehow that it's a political movement, that they are lined up politically.
Yeah, and actually the fear should be something like, if you want to talk about one segment of the environmental community that hunters and anglers, I think, are pretty clearly not wanting to get lumped into. We talked about it last week. We talked about the use, for example, of ballot initiatives as a tool to stop hunting, or the fact that there's constant litigation to keep species like wolves on the endangered species list from groups who recognize, if you were to talk to them, who recognize that they're recovered and they shouldn't be there, but are going to fight to keep them there because they don't want to see them hunted, right? And that's the faction that then, if we start labeling people as green decoys, and that's the faction that those hunters get lumped into, right? I don't know that that's reasonable. In fact, I know that's not reasonable. And so there are political motives behind some of the tactics that are used by what I think all of us would call a more fanatic environmental movement, right? To shut down all development on public lands of any kind of extraction, to stop hunting of any kind, having people start thinking about the animal as an individual rather than a collective species, right? That's out there. Mm-hmm. And by having folks that are on other sides of the spectrum pushing this narrative within the sportsman's community about green decoys, it's fracturing that community. And like I said, it's trying to make people think that that you're not really a member of a hunting group, that you're actually a member of a group that's trying to take those rights or opportunities away.
I say this all the time to people in regards to Democrat and Republican. And I always say, look, don't think that you need to join one of those parties because one's pro-lands and one's pro-guns and you have to take one or the other and then pick your poison. I say, no, don't do that. You need to belong to your group and you need to ensure that they understand your priorities and make them vote on your priorities the way that you want. Don't give in to the priority of the party. The same thing goes for these organizations. If you belong to an organization as a membership, don't just assume that you sign up and then you are along for the ride and on this whatever it is, whether it's a running horse or a Trojan horse, whatever it is. Don't assume that you are that the direction is set. Recognize that you have to have a voice in the organization and demand that the organization represent you and your viewpoints. And this is why I say that. We all have politics. We all have places that we come from in terms of how we vote. If you're a member of an organization and you have a guy who doesn't share your political ideology 100%, who's in that organization, that doesn't mean you need to quit the organization. That means you work together on the things that you have consensus on. That's how you get things done.
Let me give you so I want to give an example of what a Green Decoy group might be.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I hate to use the term. Actually, I really don't like the term. And I almost think we should distance ourselves from it. But I like the Trojan Horse term better.
Hey, all right.
So let's use that. And I'm not going to name names. But if you want to find a Trojan Horse group, I'd look at it this way. I'd break this into two buckets. So on the one side, you have some of the groups we've been talking about, whom, when you look at their funding, do they take money from foundations? Sure. Almost all of these sportsmen's organizations a good number of them are taking money from foundations of some kind, and
they're taking grants.
They're taking grants because for very specific projects.
That's right.
That if you really look at them, they're really advancing the mission of the organization, and they're trying to create opportunity. They really are fulfilling a hunter and angler mission. It doesn't matter where the money comes if the on-the-ground work is benefiting hunters and anglers. And they're coming from a lot of different places, and they also get money from membership dues, and so they have multiple buckets of revenue. And so you can actually deflect some of this argument of, well, they got funding from this group, so they must be this Trojan Horse or this Green Decoy, right? Here's what I'd tell you to look for. Look for those organizations that have no members.
Yeah.
Look for those organizations that have one funder. Maybe they have an executive director, and maybe they have one funder. And then you can look at that funder. And I've seen this happen. I'm not going to name names of organizations. People can go find them out on their own, and the people behind them on their own. But there are organizations where somebody might hire an executive director, and then that funder, that sole funder, is really pulling all of the strings and all of the objectives, and might be writing all the press releases and all the calls to action. And that is a de facto Trojan Horse, right? So look at that, and then look at Charity Navigator. If they happen to be a 501c3 and they have a board, look at Charity Navigator. That can give you some good insight as to whether they're really fulfilling their mission, whether they're using resources in the right way, whether they're transparent. If the less transparent they are, there are more red flags that should go up for you. So are there groups out there where there are folks trying to create an organization and use the name of hunters and anglers for a cause that's nefarious? I think the answer is yes.
It's a certainty.
It's absolutely
no. It's a certainty, and I can pick up. I can point to some, but if you want them, they're out there. Go
right.
ahead.
But like I said, I think it's those situations where you're like, do they have any members? And if the answer is no, then you should start. That's going to raise some questions, right? Mm-hmm. Do they have members? Do they have more than one employee? Do they have any employees? Is it just a website? Can you find an employee anywhere?
Are they active year after year, or are they just active during an election cycle?
Right. Or are they only active for a particularly controversial issue? Or once these groups have been established for years and years, you can kind of tell what they are, and the proof's in the pudding. You can see what they're doing on the ground, and you can see, okay, does it have is there some benefit to me as a hunter and angler? You can look at TRCP, since this is an organization that the greendecoy.com calls out. And we just had them on a couple of weeks to talk about work that I'm jumping to a conclusion here, but I'm just assuming that the work that they did, and I know what happens when you assume, it makes a what out of you and me. But jumping to that assumption, they did all that whole report on access. Right? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of time. It's going to take some money to do that. It wouldn't surprise me if they had foundation money helping them with that project. Do the results of that help hunters and anglers? I think so. Anyway, so I just think dig a little deeper. Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Don't believe everything you read on the internet. I'm going to give you the counter argument,
Okay.
or the counter concern. Don't let your organization become that. So don't, don't let your organization, if you have a fear and you think your organization isn't representing you the right way,
Speak up.
Speak up. Don't quit. And I've seen this too often on, post online. Somebody, and remember, the people who work for these organizations, they're just like you and me, or the guy across the street at the coffee shop or whatever. There's a variety of personalities and individuals and opinions. And if you think somebody is, miscategorizing where the community should be or where the organization should be on an individual basis, and I don't care whether it's the editor or the president or the, a chairman or a member of the board or whatever, call them out on it. And as a member of the organization, demand that your organization have accountability and stick with it. Because saying, you know what, I don't like what you said about B, and then quitting an organization, that doesn't help it get better. That doesn't help it magnify its voice. And some of these organizations, they're too important in who they represent. They're too important in terms of what they do and the demographic in that organization than for to just give up on. Because if we give up on these organizations, then what do we have?
Well, here's my final thought on this all. And this is a kind of a history lesson for us. This idea behind Green Decoys, this isn't a new thing. Right? In the 1800s, as we were eviscerating our wildlife resources, there were small groups of people getting together saying, we shouldn't do this. There were hunters getting together saying, we're doing something wrong. We're losing everything. We should fix this. They were called radicals at the time for thinking that we should stop market hunting, that we should have seasons and licenses and so forth. Fast forward into the middle part of the 20th century. And we had people that were out there saying things like, we probably shouldn't have rivers starting on fire. And we should try and save species that are going extinct. And we want clean water when we drink, and we want to be able to see from one side of town to the other rather than having air pollution. Those people were called radicals at the time. Right? Now we're at a time where people are, where we have hunters and anglers demanding certain things from, they want access. They want responsible development. They still want that clean water. And now you have this these efforts being made to divide them and call hunters radicals again. Right? It's always going to be there. There's going to be a different iteration of being a radical that's always there. You got to be cognizant of that. But let's not fall into the trap of fighting against each other. We say this so frequently that as being 5% of the overall population as hunters, all we have are each other. And if we're fighting with each other, we don't have anything. And so don't let outside forces trying to create division succeed in creating that division. So that's kind of my parting thought on that.
Nephi, I just want to know how elk can ever punch a tag for voting.
How an elk can ever punch a tag for voting?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah, last episode you were talking about elk voting. That's all I'm curious about because I wasn't around and just listened to the last episode.
What did I say?
Well, we get off the rails when you're not here, and we
Yeah.
say some stuff that we probably shouldn't.
All right. That was my final thought.
You're
I
supposed to
still
be
want
here
to I still want to imagine how an elk could vote.
Well, let me tell you how they could vote. With a machine. Somehow. If they could read their mind and they would express what they... Or you could we'll talk about this offline.
All right.
You got anything else you want to add, Nephi, to this discussion?
A lot. I think it's important discussion, and I think it's, because I haven't said this yet, it's more challenging than you think.
You've said challenging 3 times now.
Yeah,
So
you
for
have
people-
said it a lot.
So for people that want to, again, drive this into a tiny little box and say, I'm going to castigate a bunch of people, and they're the Green Decoys, and put them over here, and then it's more complex than that. Mm-hmm. And these things, ultimately, these are people issues and relationship issues and their growth issues, and be involved in them and be part of the solution. And again, this isn't popular today to be to be part of the solution, because what it means is you got to have to sit down and talk with people. You got to interact with people. You got to, that's not keyboard commando stuff. That's a phone call. So participate in your organizations. Don't be scared to be a member of an organization.
But be scared if they don't have members.
Be scared if they don't have members, and be scared if they don't listen to their members.
Yeah.
That's the last thing. As I say, be a member of an organization. If your organization doesn't really care what you think, and they're going to go where they want to go, well, then leave.
All right.
I don't know what more you can say beyond that. If anybody else wants to chime in on this, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. So weigh in, let us know what do you think? What do you think about green decoys? Is it a term we should abandon? Should we push back on? Does it really have you nervous? Does it have you up at night thinking about this? Let us know. yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Send us that email. And until next time, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.